on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. We've got a huge program for you. James Morrow with the big local international news of the day. Queensland MP Robbie Katter is here with a reality check for Premier Steven Miles. Freya Leach will tell us about what's happening on Australian university campuses. And I cross to the UK to speak to Darren Grimes as footage emerges from Edinburgh showing police approaching a Jewish man and advising him to hide his Star of David necklace in case it triggers the supposedly peaceful protesters. We have a lot to get through. Let's jump right into it with the host of the US report, James Morrow. James, much excitement today as Prime Minister Anthony Albanese finally secured that yes, announcing his engagement to Jodie Hayden. He could become the first PM to have a wedding in office.
Well, yeah, he could. There's already, though, Rita, and by the way, it's great to be here and congratulations on the new show, a lot of cynicism around this move by the Prime Minister. I mean, first of all, look, I think we've all got to be honest about it, that proposing on Valentine's Day, Rita, I think that's a little bit naff, but particularly when he's got so many other, come on, you know what I'm saying, Rita. It's a bit naff. It's a bit, really, are we really 16 here? But also, there's a lot of talk about how much pressure he's under at the moment in Parliament with Andrew Giles, with today's employment numbers, which aren't looking too hot either. Gee, what a good way to reset the media narrative, Rita. I don't know, call me cynical.
Oh, James, obviously you have been hurt because where is your romantic side? No, I think there are plenty of people who feel precisely as you do. And you mentioned the employment data. I mean, that is a consequential issue nobody seems to be talking about today. All I kept hearing about was the engagement news. But today's employment data was not good, and that's putting it lightly. Unemployment rate has jumped to 4.1%. It's the highest, James, in 2 years. That is not good.
Well, it's not good. And also, I've spoken to some bank economists today. They see this softening employment market continuing. They don't think this is a one-off. This is going to continue. The growth in employed people was only 500. The economy added 500 new jobs to the economy in the last period. At the same time, underemployment is up. And, this all goes to this bigger narrative, Rita, that Australian households are moving backwards. Our household income is moving backwards. Our per capita GDP is moving backwards. We've got a very large migration intake that masks a lot of these things, but the pressures are really starting to show. And I think these employment numbers are a big warning bell for the government.
Now, you're a man of many talents. You are the National Affairs Editor for the Daily Telegraph, as well as the Sky News host. And you wrote in today's paper about the Albanese government pushing for treaty and truth-telling despite last year's overwhelming vote against an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Why is the PM hell-bent on defying the will of the Australian people? This is an important issue, and he seems to be at odds with the majority across the nation. And I know you spoke to Jacinta Price about this as well.
Jacinta Price said, exactly what I think a lot of people are saying. We had the referendum. We said, no, we do not want these symbolic things because, ultimately things like treaty and truth-telling are symbolic, and they also have the real risk of being very divisive, and they don't do anything to close those gaps. And I spoke to Jacinta Price. I spoke to Anthony Dillon, a lot of respected thinkers on this sort of thing. There's real practical things that can be done to help those Indigenous communities that need them. But this idea that we keep people separate and that there's something inherently always different about Indigenous Australians versus every other Australian, it's divisive. And all of these things that Anthony Albanese wants to do, they push that narrative. And it's not helpful for anybody. It's not helpful for social cohesion. And it's not helpful for the people who actually need practical help on the ground. Jacinta Price says there needs to be an audit. I think she's absolutely right because, we know billions of dollars have poured into communities with very, very little to show for it.
Well, yes, that gap is still there. It's not getting any better despite the billions we spend in this area every year. Let's talk about Queensland Premier Steven Miles very quickly. I'm going to look at him in the next, later in the program, but he's had a rough couple of weeks, we've got to say, and he did try to lighten the mood with this Valentine's Day post, but it wasn't well received, James. I choose to make trains in Queensland happy.
Rita
he's got a bit of Ralph Wiggum in him. Why would he want to highlight that?
I mean, just look at him. Just look at him. He actually looks a bit like, old little Ralphie there. And he's sitting at the back of the bus there, and he's looking at his poll numbers and goes, "Oh no, I'm in danger." So he puts up these dumb memes. I mean, he's really seriously in a lot of trouble here, Rita.
He really is. I don't know why you would. And a lot of the responses were putting up Ralph Wiggum images just to drive that point home.
Yeah.
Now let's get to more important stuff. US, and we seem to see this protection racket continue for the Biden family. We've got Hunter's former business associate, Tony Bobulinski, testifying in the Joe Biden impeachment inquiry this week. He went on the record to say that the United States law enforcement have been unwilling to speak with him, that they are supposedly investigating this, and he's talking about corruption. The allegations that are being made here are quite serious, and yet he's had no contact from the FBI or the Justice Department.
Well, I think probably we know, Rita, that the reason why that's happened is because the FBI and the other letter agencies, they've been too busy out there trying to bring 93 different charges against Donald Trump and stop him from winning the presidency in November. But this is really serious stuff, though. I mean, the allegations are, and what we've seen now is Tony Bobulinski has come out and said Joe Biden was the big guy in the whole sort of Biden, some people call it crime family effort to monetize the family name, office, and connections to sell influence to foreign governments, among other things. Really, really shocking stuff. Really shocking stuff. And yet, apparently the FBI doesn't want to know about it. And it goes to this narrative that the FBI, the Department of Justice, is corrupt and politicized in the United States, which is terrible because, these agencies should be above politics. And so when you start to lose faith, Rita, in things like that, it's really so bad for the country, even beyond just letting the Bidens skate on these charges.
And I think it's something a lot of Australians don't understand because we just get the reports about indictments and this. They don't understand that in the US, what has happened with the Justice Department, with the FBI, CIA, and how politicised it has become. And you see the polling in the US, the lack of trust in these institutions is astonishing. The overwhelming majority of people don't trust them. And that is, again, a crisis that needs to be addressed. And we've also had stunning revelations. More on that is with what happened in 2016, the Russian collusion hoax that was thrust upon the country for a good 4 years. It's now been revealed that the CIA and foreign intelligence agencies illegally surveilled 26 associates of Donald Trump in the run-up to the 2016 election, which ultimately triggered the false accusations that Trump's campaign had been colluding with Russia. What do you make of these developments, James?
Well, look, I mean, it's shocking stuff, but for, Rita, you and I have spoken about this a lot on The Outsiders. I've spoken a lot about this on the U.S. report, but, it's not a surprise to me. We know that the way that they laundered all of these allegations against Trump, including, those very, shall we say, lurid allegations about him and his behavior in a Moscow hotel room. But let's put that to one side, even though it is a bit late in the evening, that these were laundered through foreign intelligence agencies, and that the CIA was involved with this doesn't surprise me one bit. But again, this is this whole thing. You have this effort to jail the opposition leader, essentially, that's going on right now. And yet the media is so happy to trumpet these things. And yet on the other things, the Bobulinski things, they say, oh, well, they're unproven allegations, so I don't know why Trump keeps repeating them. Well, I mean, you see the game.
Well, Absolutely. They keep saying there's no smoking gun. Well, except from the testimony of people who were there, the emails, the text messages. There is a wealth of data, and yet they ran with the Russian collusion hoax based on just the flimsiest allegations, which have since been debunked. Now, this is an own goal for the Republicans, who voted to expel George Santos from his seat in New York. It was a marginal seat. Well, James, the Democrats have managed to flip that seat. You've got to give it to the Democrats. They seem to have a little bit more party discipline than the Republicans. You've got all sorts of shady characters like Senator Bob Menendez who are feeling very safe. They're not scared of being expelled at all.
Look, I mean, this is just, this is a great lesson for people on the right of politics. Don't do what people who don't like you want you to do because you think they will like you. This is what they did. They said, oh, the media is making all this fun of us for having this weirdo George Santos. And he was absolutely a weirdo. Let's not, gloss over that. He's a strange cat with a lot of just bizarre stuff in his life and his history and lies and so on. But whatever. Bob Menendez, just across the Hudson River in New Jersey, he's still in Congress. They found gold bars hidden in his sofa. He has been peddling influence, allegedly, I think, to Egypt and possibly other countries. All sorts of real sort of classic corruption with the money and the briefcases and, the sort of stuff you would have seen, in the 80s or something like that. And the Democrats, they say, well, no, he's still in. We're not letting him go. So, Republicans do this. People on the right here do this all the time, too. The media tells them to do something, and they jump, and they say, oh, they'll like us now. And then it's like, Lucy with the football in the cartoons, and yoink, they pull him away.
They don't learn, though. This is the thing. They do not learn the lesson. They don't learn. Now, I know you don't like talking Harry and Meghan, but we're going to do it very briefly because they've adopted the Sussex title as their surname for themselves, for the children. It's reported that couple did it to unify the family. It's all over their relaunched website, but I don't know, James. I thought they promised the Queen to no longer use the royal name for their personal brands. I mean, this seems to be a bit of a betrayal of what the Queen wanted.
Well, it's absolutely a betrayal. I mean, and this is a betrayal of their commitments. They wanted out of the family. They got out of the family, but no, we still want the Sussex name. I mean, I'm expecting them to start selling schlocky bath towels or something like that, with their names on them at this point. It's just, they're just grifters. And, poor Harry, he got pulled into this. And, there's a lot of issues now and questions around with the King's health, whether the family might be unified again. But it's like this constant, just sleazy behavior. I think people are sick of it. They're not listening anymore.
No. And you know what? I don't have any sympathy for Harry. I know a lot of people just blame Meghan and say Harry's a victim. But, the man's 40. He's making his own decisions. Now, finally, we speak a lot about young people suffering climate anxiety. It's widespread nowadays. But we have to remember catastrophist climate predictions are nothing new and they have a real cost associated with them. This letter in the Wall Street Journal has gone viral and, James, it's just desperately sad. Let's have a look at it. It says, I was a college student when I read Mr. Elrich's The Population Bomb. I took it to heart and now have no grandchildren, but 50 years later, the population has increased to 8 billion without dire consequences. I was gullible and stupid. That's from Kenneth. There are so many of these catastrophist climate predictions and they don't come true, and yet these characters don't pay any sort of a cost. This Paul Elrich is still put up by the media, some sort of a guru. He's still given a platform to spread his crazy predictions.
This was all big in the 70s and 80s. A guy named Paul Ehrlich, he wrote a book called The Population Bomb and said that, the world was going to see, riots and food starvation, all sorts of problems because the population was going to grow too high. And all sorts of, climate mayhem and other sort of environmental mayhem would ensue. None of this, of course, happened. The world got bigger. The world got richer. Technology allowed us to grow more crops and feed more people. But it's this mentality that still infects the left, and we see it with Greta Thunberg. You can go into the ABC website right now, and I guarantee you, within like 2 keystrokes, you'll find some piece by somebody saying, I'm 32 and I'm never going to have a child because I wouldn't bring them into this climate change world and all of this sort of stuff. And of course, it becomes very sad because, of course, as people grow up, they realize that all of these youthful obsessions have consequences. And then, they're sad and alone and, and don't have anybody. And they've wasted a lot of their life and opportunities, thinking the world's going to end. That's no way to live. And what are we doing telling young people who should be optimistic that the world is going to end and that they're in a crisis and a catastrophe and that their very existence threatens the planet? I mean, it's just evil, Rita. There's no other word.
Absolutely. James Morrow, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you 8 p.m. tomorrow night with the US Report and, of course, Sunday morning for Outsiders. Now, joining me is Director of the Centre for Youth Policy at Menzies Research Centre, Freya Leach. Freya, you've been busy at the University of Sydney. Let's have a look.
We're here at Sydney Uni O Week and it's time to clean up campus.
Not sure why you didn't take those Marxist porn posters down as well, but tell me, how bad is the anti-Israeli sentiment on university campuses?
So USyd's just gone back. It's O Week this week and it is reaching new levels. Almost every second stall has a Palestine flag at it. We decided to do a bit of we call it a freedom convoy through the centre of Eastern Avenue. And so we walked down, members of the Conservative Club holding an Australian flag and an Israeli flag. And we got absolutely swarmed by socialists, Jew haters, anti-Israel activists. It was horrible, and they basically followed us all the way around campus. So it is seriously, it's really disturbing. It's actually almost dangerous, physically dangerous, to be openly supporting Israel on campus right now.
It's just insane. You probably will get less grief supporting Hamas than you would supporting Israel on some of these university campuses. This is how crazy things have become, and we need to address it because this is no longer just a fringe element. It's bleeding into other parts of society, and this is an example from London. Soho Theatre has condemned the actions of comedian Paul Curry after he targeted a Jewish man who refused to stand up for the Palestinian flag. We're learning a little bit more about just how bad this incident was. Have a look at this.
The comedian began swearing at and insulting a Jewish audience member before encouraging the crowd to join in and ordering him to leave the venue. Leav Eitan says he was targeted because he refused to give a standing ovation after Curry started waving a Palestine flag on stage.
He tried to incite the entire crowd against us, and the atmosphere was deteriorating quite quickly. It really did feel like there could be a danger to life immediately if we didn't leave.
Palestine will live forever!
Paul Curry has been a vocal critic of Israel and supporter of the Palestinian cause. Before the performance, he had been out on a march in central London.
I would say that the way to demonstrate for that and to support his cause isn't to pick on people in his crowd, to abuse them and to threaten them and to intimidate them and to kick them out of his show.
Leav says he fled the performance for his own safety, but received no support from the Soho Theatre. In a statement, the venue said, "We are sorry and saddened by an incident which has caused upset and hurt to members of the audience."
Freya, that comic is coming to Melbourne for the Comedy Festival. I'm not suggesting he shouldn't come, but there are certainly calls from some for his shows to be canned. Where do you stand on this issue?
It's really challenging because I obviously believe in freedom of speech, and in many senses I think, that comedian has every right to show his true colours. If he wants to support Hamas, by all means let him expose himself for a terror supporter or targeting Jews. then at least he's exposed and we can all see where he actually stands. When you eliminate freedom of speech, people who actually are anti-Semitic or do support terror organisations can get away with it because they're not exposed in public. But at the same time, I think targeting a Jewish person at a comedy show, that is totally different. That is not just exercising freedom of speech, that is actually targeting someone because of their religion, because of their ethnicity, something they did not choose. And I think this is part of a broader trend we're seeing, which is the radical left and the pro-Palestinians trying to alienate and push Jewish and pro-Zionist people out of public life. We see it at UCID. You can't be an openly Jewish student on campus. You can't carry an Israeli flag on campus. You get alienated and ostracized. This is their strategy. In every sector of our society, they're trying to push Zionists and Jewish people to the fringe.
Oh, it's fine if you're Jewish as long as you're a self-loathing Jew. If you are against Israel, if you're anti-Zionist, you don't actually believe Israel has a right to exist, then they love you. But if you actually believe that Israel should be able to defend itself, then you are... well, you're not just criticised, you're sometimes threatened. And what happened in that comedy show, as you heard from the guy, the crowd was encouraged to turn against him as well, and he felt for his safety he had to leave. Now, we spoke earlier in the week about hundreds of Jewish people having their personal details leaked from a private WhatsApp group. I've talked to several people who were on that list. The Australian today has done a superb piece highlighting what happened, who some of the main culprits were, who was pushing this in social media. Freya, what has been the fallout from this entire ugly episode?
It's just devastating. It's completely and utterly devastating for the people in this group chat who've had their personal details leaked online to a vicious and angry mob. I actually was speaking to one woman earlier this week who's a photographer who's received death threats, horrible comments on her businesses. People have gone on to Google and left 1-star reviews just because she's Jewish and she was in a group chat where she could be supported by other Jews. It's horrible, and it's also devastating for our country. Are we really at a point where people can make lists of Jews and then publish them online for people to target? I'm so disturbed as an Australian that this is happening in our country in the 21st century. This is more reminiscent of 1930s Germany than it is of 2024 Australia.
Now, you've got a march, a pro-Israel march. Just tell us where people can go and what time.
Neveraganisnow.com.au. You can register for the tickets and you'll be sent the location. It's going to be in town in Sydney, 3 p.m. this Sunday. This is a march against anti-Semitism and a march for our Australian values of tolerance and respect.
Freya Leach, I applaud the work you're doing, and you're a brave young woman to be walking in a university campus with an Australian flag, let alone an Israeli flag, is a brave move indeed. And it's sad that it's brave. It should not be anything that is controversial. Freya Leach, thank you so much for your time. Coming up, we have a bumper edition of Lefties Losing It. Plus, police tell a Jewish man to hide his Star of David necklace. And millions of Brits plunged into energy poverty. Darren Grimes joins me next. You're watching the Rita Panahi Show, and now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start, Lefties, with this revelation that the left are everything they claim to hate. They're invariably intolerant, racist, reality-denying bigots. Watch this clip from Canada where a lefty Karen screams foul abuse at a man, telling him to go back where he came from. Why? Because he's protesting against an illicit drug facility being opened in their community. Go back to Hong Kong, you don't belong here. That's what she said, because he's against a drug den being established in his neighbourhood. And I've got to say, this pro-drug lefty is straight from Central Casting. Charming stuff there. Now, more crazed anti-Israeli protesters, and they have a new genocidal chant, and this time they're a lot more clear in wanting to wipe out Israel. See if you can work out what they're chanting here as they pour fake blood around Columbia University. They are chanting, "We don't want two states, we want all of it." Where does that leave the Jews? As a smart woman once said, when people show you who they are, believe them. Now to the leftiest of lefty heartland, San Francisco, where the streets are full of human feces. Yes, even The Guardian asked, why is San Francisco covered in human feces? And that's not the only issue, with high rates of violence and property crimes and mobs of lawless thugs feeling increasingly emboldened. Like last week when a mob came across a driverless car and, of course, they decided to smash it up and then set it alight. Ooh, what fun. And note, it isn't just a few brainless thugs destroying someone's property. Look at all those people approvingly laughing along, taping the whole thing. That's a broken society right there. Now, we brought you a Lefties Losing It featuring Bill Maher. Just recently, he was embarrassed on his own program by Patrick Bet-David when Maher expressed his undying and frankly irrational love for California Governor Gavin Newsom, the man who has helped turn San Francisco into a zoo. Newsom was mayor of San Fran from 2004 to 2011, and Gavin has brought that destructive magic to the rest of the state as the governor of California. His policies of seeing Californians flee in record numbers to states like Texas and Florida, and yet the lefties still love him. Even the so-called sensible lefties like Bill Maher, who was again humbled on his own show, this time by Gillian Michaels.
Trying to get Gavin to run for president for a very long time. And
are you serious? Are we living in Gavin Newsom's California? Why?
Yeah, and I'm sure your life is just a nightmare.
Left because of him.
Did it affect your life?
Is the crime affecting our lives? Is the homelessness affecting our lives?
Was crime affecting your life here in California?
Yeah, absolutely. My house got broken into.
Your house got broken into?
Yes. Guess who let the guy out during COVID? Newsom. It was the guy's third offense. He broke into our house. He had duct tape and a video camera. Anyway, long story, but third strike, guy goes to jail, gets let out during COVID. I mean, give me a break. You're not going to hold PG&E accountable for that fire in 2018.
Yeah.
You're going to decriminalize everything but regulate nothing. You're prioritizing the crazy shit I've ever seen in my life.
My thing with Gavin is, first of all, he can win. First of all, I just like him.
We handled COVID. California was the last state to reopen.
Not for it.
Shut the schools forever.
Now, the rise of anti-Semitism together with the politicisation of the police force is increasingly an issue in the West. We've seen examples of it right here in Australia, but I would argue it is considerably worse in Europe, in the UK. Take a look at this anti-Israeli protest in Edinburgh, where police approach a Jewish man just standing there minding his own business, but they go across to him and advise him that it would be best if he hid his Star of David necklace because it could trigger the protesters.
If people see your star, which I appreciate that you feel it, they will just get very, very angry. Okay, so I'm just making you aware that that might trigger the people, because obviously I understand you're sitting off the different sides of the fence. That's my only concern. Okay, that the star will set them off and they're causing an argument. There's only 3 of us here. It might be difficult for us to manage the situation. Okay.
I don't plan to argue or engage with anyone.
No,
and it is my religion. I am Jewish.
Yeah.
Well, no, we wouldn't want to set off the peaceful protesters, would we? To discuss this and much more, I'm joined by GB News presenter Darren Grimes. Darren, is that Scotland in 2024 or 1930s Germany?
What have Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP done to Scotland, Rita? That's what I have to ask you, because I tell you what, if we actually looked across there today and someone was wearing a hijab or a burqa and they were told to take it off for fear that they may trigger a so-called peaceful protester, can you imagine, Rita, the outcry from that, the liberal protestation, the liberal indignation? It would be off the charts. But when it happens to a Jewish person, they are completely ignored, sidelined. Do you think the police would ever make such demands of any other religion? I certainly don't. And I think actually, as I say there, the political and media class would be screaming until blue in the face. There would be accusations of police being Islamophobic. There would be accusations of religious intolerance. But when it comes to the Star of David, must that be covered? Why can these people not be told that if they threaten somebody or approach them and they are violent in any way, that they will face the full threat of the law? This is appeasement to the mob, Rita. And I think our police officers need to recognise that they're not there to form a protection ring for these mobs. They're there to actually enforce the law, protect the public. That means protecting Jews. And they need a sharp reminder that the freedom of expression of religious identity applies to all faiths and not just one of them.
You are so right. It is mob rule. That's all it is. And in the tape, the police officer also talks about there's only 3 of us here, and he was worried that they wouldn't be able to protect this guy because of his Star of David if the mob saw it. Well, if this is such a easily triggered violent mob, then have more than 3 police officers there to protect the community. Why would you only have 3? It is astonishing. And you're so right. If it was the other way around, if there was some white supremacy march or some say, Muslim march, and someone was told to take off your hijab because it might trigger the protesters, the entire police hierarchy would have to step down in disgrace. There would be all sorts of reviews and investigations, and how could this culture be allowed to take hold? Now, going into the judiciary now, British Judge Tan Ikram, who decided not to punish 3 women who were displaying parachute images at a pro-Palestinian protest recently. He just gave them a slap on the wrist, is under fire because it's now been revealed, Darren, that he liked social media posts that were anti-Israel, one I think called Israel a terrorist state, and another one he liked that called for freeing of Palestine, presumably not free from Hamas. We've got the police and the judiciary who should both be above politics.
Absolutely, Rita. And I think you're absolutely right to highlight that we in Europe are perhaps a few years ahead of where Australia may ultimately end up. We saw, those scenes outside the Sydney Opera House that were, in my view, utterly disgusting. But I think when you consider what's happened here in Britain over the recent weeks, we've had an army veteran member of Parliament, Rita, who actually fought to save a copper's life after a terrorist attacked this police officer, and he's now had his home targeted by pro-Palestinian thugs. We had MPs in Jewish constituencies having their offices torched. We've seen Labour, of course, cement its position as the home of anti-Semitism here in Britain. So much for Sir Keir Starmer changing his party. And then today, of course, Rita, that Star of David incident. And now, as you rightly say, this judge who apparently accidentally liked a certain tweet. It just smacks I know, isn't that absurd? This is someone who's sitting pretty. He's got a CBE, an honour from His Majesty the King. He sits on a judicial appointments committee, but then he's gone and liked another LinkedIn post. And these posts are calling, as you rightly say, Israel a terrorist state and the chance for free Palestine. This isn't just a social media gaffe, right? This is like finding out that your vegan mate has been sneaking bacon butties into his packed lunchbox. But I think that we've got to recognise women who were just waved off after broadcasting these images of paragliders at protests. These weren't just paragliders, right? They were a nod to a really horrific part of the Hamas invasion of Israel on October 7th. 1,200 Israelis. Do these people have no humanity? Do they not look?
We know what the paragliders mean. I mean, we saw the Chicago branch of BLM post that image as well, and that caused some controversy. But the paragliders is glorifying those bloodthirsty terrorists who flew into a music festival and raped, tortured and murdered scores of young people who were there to enjoy the music. I mean, that's what they are celebrating. That it is not. It's not even trying to be artful about it. It is being very blatantly saying by any means, including rape, torture and murder. Now let's move on to this is another case of going woke and going broke, Darren. The Body Shop, the British cosmetic company, it's been plunged into administration and its stores in the UK are at risk of closing. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I don't know, viewers may well be aware because I remember doing it on Sky News Australia at the time, Rita, but the Body Shop attacked J.K. Rowling, right? They told her that actually she should read some book by some trans activist and enjoy one of their vegan bath bombs to actually relax as she reads this book and educates herself, those watchwords of the moment. But clearly these clowns, Rita, have focused on whackery and wokery over sales and customer service. And actually, I think J.K. Rowling will continue to have the last laugh, not just on the Body Shop, but every other woke organisation that has attacked her for standing up for women's rights and actually single-sex spaces and the sanctity of those spaces themselves. I actually think this goes to show that the commercial curse of being woke, a woke joke, it's struck again. We saw this with Bud Light, Rita. We saw this with so many other of woke corporates that have focused on the priorities, and it comes back to royally bite them on the behind.
Oh, you're so right. And you know what? They used to be a little bit in the activist space years ago, but it related to their products. So their big thing was, we don't test on animals, and they're a cosmetic company. So you're like, okay, if I care about that, that is a big plus. And I think that was great. But then they're starting to go after J.K. Rowling and lecture women about accepting male bodies into female spaces and getting into all sorts of really divisive, ugly, fringe issues that have got nothing to do with the cosmetic industries. And look where they are now. Now, to an issue that impacts everybody in the UK. UK businesses are suffering from power price pain, and that means that their prices are going to go up. 4 out of 5 say that high energy bills will force them to raise prices for customers over the next 2 years. And we've already got, Darren, UK families struggling to pay their bills. Around 6 million households are in what's called energy poverty. All self-inflicted pain, Darren.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. This is the madness of following net zero, the net zero orthodoxy of being more Greta than Glasgow. This is the insanity of it. We've got sky-high inflation, and then the economists are saying to us, Rita, well, this is exactly the problem of approaching these so-called reliable renewables, which are anything but. I could stand outside and hope that the wind is going to blow so I can power my home, Rita. But, you can't guarantee, you can't power a gas boiler with that. You know, you can't heat your home. We had elderly people in this country over recent years who have literally died from pneumonia because they are too cold to put the heating on in a country that, guess what, gets really rather cold. We've just seen British Steel close its doors in Wales, where Welsh working class families are saying, we don't know what we're going to do. And that's because energy is so prohibitively expensive. And these energy intensive industries, which are national key security battlegrounds that we're going to need in an increasingly volatile world, where actually they're saying we can't afford to operate in Britain anymore. And then you compare us with other European nations. France hasn't pursued this net zero dogma as insanely as we have. They actually went hell for the leather on nuclear energy. We shunned that. Our politicians said no to that. We need wind, we need solar. Well, Britain is a country that the sun doesn't shine in very often. And when the wind blows, well, as I say, you can't heat a home or power a gas boiler with that stuff. We're going to need oil and gas for many, many years to come. This is the utter insanity of this pursuit. As I say, it's placing Greta and activist politics above the British people. And that's where the government has gone totally wrong. And it makes me utterly mad, Rita.
Darren, you are so right. It is weakening the country. It is self-inflicted harm. And sadly, the British public have no choice because Labor is even more hell-bent on net zero than the Tories who've inflicted this pain on the country. Darren Grimes, always a pleasure. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks, Rita.
Coming up, Queensland MP Robbie Katter joins me to discuss the state's youth crime crisis. Now, it's been a busy week for the Queensland government. Premier Steven Miles is pushing to legislate the state's ambitious 75% emissions reduction target, shifting the focus from Queensland's worsening crime crisis. Joining me now is Robbie Katter. Robbie, this was Steven Miles' first parliamentary week as Premier. How do you rate his performance?
Well, Rita, is someone ironically is coming to you with a diesel-powered generator running my house at the moment. I guess that'd be the start of the way I'd address it. His priorities don't really align with the people that I mix with, and I mix with a fair bit of regional Queensland and a fair bit of Brisbane as well. So good luck to him, but I think it's just a bit more of the same for us in Queensland.
Now, the Queensland government is very keen to decriminalise sex work. It's a contentious policy area and frankly, one would have thought they have bigger issues to focus on, like, I don't know, crime. Tell me how this is being received, Robbie, and why the Queensland Premier seems hesitant to do anything really meaningful about crime and youth crime in particular.
Yeah, it's quite easy to explain. They're chasing that inner city, urban, latte-sipping lefty vote in Brisbane. And, the likes of the Youth Justice Minister, Di Farmer, her seat's under threat from the Greens. So they're trying to look like civil libertarians that go in there on the side of the offenders and saying we need to protect their rights. And, it's all about making sure they're okay through this process and rehabilitating them. And the focus or their primary responsibility that should be towards the people who were victims of the crime, they get forgotten and subordinated. And that's been the basis of their approach from the start, and they're dominated by that side of the left that will be chasing those votes in this next election, so they can't afford to be too fast from that. And we've tried to put some options on the table that still could resemble some sort of policy that fits into that mould for them. But really, they spent 5 years pretending there was no problem. And I'm at ground zero in North Queensland. Mount Isa, the city I live in, I'm talking to you from right now, it's one of the worst places in Queensland. And the kids are just getting more and more brazen.
Well, today's Courier Mail made for disturbing reading. They reported that some frontline officers are too scared to patrol the streets. They're calling in sick, refusing to go in marked police cars. It's a sorry state of affairs, Robbie, if the Crims aren't scared of the police, but the police are scared of the Crims.
Yeah, and we also had a police officer this week who was reprimanded and downgraded in his roles because he actually took a bit of initiative and chased one of his cars and rammed it to stop it, and caught one of these blighters, and he gets reprimanded for that. So that sends a great signal to the rest of the police force, which is why so many of them have left, and the culture inside the police force in Queensland is so terrible at the moment. And yeah, I mean, I see this every day in my workings with GPS. And the poor blighters have got a tough enough job to do, but the leadership at the top has to stand behind them, and they've done just the opposite. And and these guys now running scared. They don't have the tools to do their job. They're crying out for some tools from the government, some legislative tools, and we've tried to provide those to them, but they don't seem to have the intestinal fortitude to take it up.
Well, what is the problem there? Is it police command? Is there a culture issue within the force? Why aren't they standing with their frontline officers and backing them up if they're taking some initiative, like you said? I mean, that seems to be undermining those working at the coalface. Yeah,
I don't know the short answer to that, Rita. I mean, Labor has created a culture in the public service for a number of years now where you just bend the knee, do what you're told, say what you think the government of the day wants to hear, and you'll progress yourself through the ranks. If you speak up, speak your mind, and contradict what others are saying, you get pushed sideways or out the door. And those that have bent themselves are now in charge, and they can, they've got created this culture where they just speak in echo chambers, and they're completely out of touch with the rest of Queensland. And a lot of those police workers, they're really hard-working and trying, but they're let down from the top.
And just lastly, there was a report in the Australian today that Steven Miles is planning on growing the Queensland bureaucracy. Is this something you're going to get behind?
Jeez. Rita, they've done he doesn't have to try very much harder. They've done a fantastic job in bloating it. I think they've added another 50,000 was one number I heard years ago. That's probably an antiquated number now. So I'm not sure they need to do any more of it. We need workers on the ground doing some jobs out there, not creating a lot of make-believe jobs out there that don't need to be done. And, we're highly unproductive in so many ways in the state. The last thing we need is more public servants, I'd say. We've got an election coming up in October. Are we going to get a new government? And would you be part of a coalition with Conservative forces? Look, we're very keen to send this government a message. They've done a horrible job of running Queensland for a number of years. So we're very keen to get rid of them and impose some true Conservative values and some regional values back into Queensland. It's been governed for just the southeast Queensland in the name of just winning votes to win the state for too many years. And that's not being parochial, Rita. It's just, it doesn't make sense because so many of the untapped natural resources, so much of the untapped wealth in Queensland resides in the regions. But if you don't invest in infrastructure to extract that wealth, well, it just remains potential and that's it. So sadly, we're lagging behind in Queensland. We just have fabulous wealth and growth potential. But as long as they just govern from Brisbane from 2,000 kilometres away, we won't be able to contribute like we should to the rest of Australia and build a great nation. Robbie Katter, thank you so much for your time this evening. Appreciate it. That's it from me. I'll see you at 11 p.m. on Monday night. And don't forget, Outsiders Sunday morning. Up next is Newsnight. Good night.